Mary and Peter were in mourning for their late son, who had been killed in a horrible accident. Every day they went to his tomb. Nevertheless, after about a month, they found that someone had always beaten them to it. Every day, a new rose was placed on his tomb. But who grew this rose? Peter had a solution. He put a camera to determine who it was. Yet when he saw this individual, he was taken aback. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Peter and Mary were on their way home after retrieving the footage from the camera. Their bodies were filled with a mix of exhilaration and trepidation, but nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. They waited till the next day to watch the video. As the screen twitched and a pop-up appeared, Peter and Mary watched. All they had to do now was push the play button to find out who had been placing red flowers on their son's tomb. Parents Mary and Peter had never healed fully from the death of their son, Michael. He was only 18 years old when he died in an automobile accident that devastated both of them. Since then, it had been just the two of them, which was difficult to deal with. You never expect to outlive your children as a parent. Once their son died, they didn't have much left. Their entire savings went for his funeral. The funeral was obviously very tough, but they felt lucky that they were surrounded by so many caring friends and family members to pay daily visits to his grave, bringing flowers and trinkets to remember him by. This became a ritual for them, as well as a method to keep him close. But then they discovered something odd. Mary and Peter were on their way to the graveyard on a Monday, but as they got closer to their son's grave, they discovered something on top of it. This was not here yesterday, Mary pointed out. Peter concurred. Why would anybody put something on the headstone of someone else? Mary and Peter were both perplexed. A solitary red rose lay on the headstone, and no one knew who had placed it there. They felt it was strange. They initially dismissed it as a random act of generosity by a stranger, but every time the rose withered, a new one bloomed. They learned to enjoy the rose after a few months of this. They were still determined to solve the riddle, but how? Then Peter came home one day with an idea. What if we hang cameras on the premises? Pointed to Michael's grave, he said to his wife. Mary, on the other hand, was unimpressed. I'm sure that violates the privacy policy, Peter, she said. Yet Peter was not about to give up so easy. He's determined to discover who was placing these roses on his son's tomb. So he buys a new security camera one night and drives to the graveyard without telling his wife. He installed the camera and proudly gazed at it. Now all he had to do was wait. He returned home and crawled into bed with Mary, who pretended to sleep. She was aware of what her husband had done that night, but she did not intervene. She was just as curious as he was to find out who this person was. During the next 2 weeks, they went to Michael's cemetery every day. Peter continued to act suspiciously around the tomb, slyly staring at the camera. Of course, Mary spotted it, but she said nothing to Peter about it. She enjoyed keeping her own secret, but then Peter made a mistake. On a Tuesday morning, Peter and Mary were getting ready to go for the cemetery when they received a phone call. That was the cemetery's manager. The supervisor had to confiscate the camera after someone complained about it. Because filming without everyone's permission was against the cemetery's privacy regulation, she had to turn in the camera to the police. She made an exception for Peter and Mary because she knew them personally. She retained a copy of the footage just for them, yet she didn't tell them what she saw in the video. She promised Mary and Peter they could pick up pickups to tape today at the end of the day. They could finally come by the cemetery to pick up the tape after a few hours. The cemetery supervisor, holding the USB stick, awaited them at Michael's tomb. When she handed over the USB stick, though, she murmured something Mary and Peter didn't understand. At least not yet. They brought the USB stick home but were apprehensive to look at it. What did the cemetery lady mean when she said that to them? What if watching the clip entirely altered their memories of their son? The following morning, the USB stick was still on their kitchen table. They glanced at it while eating their breakfast. Peter finally stood up and grabbed the stick. I need to know, Mary. Otherwise, I won't be able to move on, he told his wife, and she concurred. Let's watch the footage as a team, she suggested after noticing Peter's demeanor shift. He got more at ease. Yet, it would not last long. Mary sprang up and looked for her laptop. She placed it on the kitchen table and switched it on. We got this, Peter and Mary said as they exchanged one last look. With one hand, Peter grasped the USB stick, and in the other, Mary's hand. He reached for the laptop carefully and inserted the USB stick. He slid his computer mouse slowly over to the play button, making sure Mary was ready for whatever they were about to watch. The video began to play, but when he tried to play the video, there was an error message. He tried different devices and players, but nothing seemed to work. Determined to figure out the problem, Peter went to an 8 store. He explained the issue to the technician, who tried to troubleshoot the problem, but nothing seemed to work. The store manager recommended a specialist that he should go and see. Peter then went to see the video specialist recommended by the store owner. The specialist looked at the USB and said it seemed fine, but something was off. He suggested that the issue might be with the camera. Peter was at a loss but decided to visit a camera repair shop. Peter brought the camera to a repair shop, where the technician took a look. It turned out that the camera had been damaged, likely due to exposure to the elements. The technician was able to fix the camera, and Peter was excited to finally watch the footage. He rushed home, but when he tried to play the video again, he realized that the file had become corrupted. He was devastated, feeling like he was back at square one. Mary suggested he try and recover the file from the drive directly. Determined not to give up, Peter went to another specialist who specialized in data recovery. The specialist was able to retrieve the file from the USB drive, but it was incomplete. The video only played for a few seconds before cutting out. Maybe there was enough though. He took the drive, which had the few seconds of film on it at home, to watch with Mary. Peter and Mary watched several times to try and make out every possible detail within the frame. Then they noticed movement on the edge of the frame. A person dressed all in black approached their son's burial. They couldn't say anything about who it could be. The only distinguishing feature was the visitor's single crimson rose. They placed it on the grave without showing their faces. What kind of person was it? Mary said it was a lady, but the person was wearing huge sunglasses that obscured the outline of their face. However, there was something familiar about the visitor. Despite the fact she was completely dressed in black, headscarf and all, they could tell she had long blonde wavy hair. She looked very familiar. Finally, they discovered why they thought they recognized the woman. They hadn't seen the woman in over a decade. Mary and Peter kept watching the movie over and over. Finally, Mary stated that she would be unable to sleep until she had a response from the woman herself. Since so many years had passed, Peter and Mary had no way of contacting the woman. They had no friends who could have assisted them, so their only option was to go to the cemetery and wait for her to return. Mary expressed that she was feeling nervous about the situation. It had been a long time since they had spoken to this woman, and even though they desperately wanted to know why she was laying roses every day, she wasn't sure if she was up to confronting her just yet. Peter held her and told her something that changed everything. As Peter and Mary arrived at the cemetery, they noticed that the supervisor had already visited their son's grave. She inquired as to whether they had seen the video. Actually, Mary and Peter initially knew this woman from school. She was in the year above and always seemed to be snarky. The couple had the idea that this woman was just a bitter, heartless woman. At least initially. Despite the run-ins, there were times she'd shake hairs also. Mary and Peter understood that often she was just enforcing rules that she didn't make. For example, there was once an occasion where the graveyard was closing and they needed to leave. They begged her for just a little longer, and she understood and said she would come back in 30 minutes, though perhaps in a caring way. Maybe she could also help them with this. Mary and Peter inquired of the supervisor about the woman, but the supervisor knew nothing about her other that she came by on a pretty frequent basis. But since they'd set up the camera, the supervisor assumed the pair didn't know either, yet their reaction took her by surprise. It's when Peter stated that they knew who the woman was and just wanted to talk to her to find out why she was visiting Michael's cemetery. The supervisor realized the situation was even more complicated than she had imagined. It was clear that Peter was annoyed by the woman's presence, but why? The supervisor wondered why the couple didn't simply call the woman if they needed to speak with her, but she didn't want to get too involved in their family business by asking. It was clearly a private subject. Instead of leaving them alone, the supervisor did the exact opposite. The supervisor feigned to return to her office, but at the last moment, she turned to hide behind a nearby tree. She was already involved to some level and was curious about the mysterious guest who came to the tomb. And she didn't have much time to wait. The supervisor spotted a car pull into the lot as she was hidden behind the tree. It was one she saw frequently, and she was certain it belonged to the woman who came to see Michael. She was overjoyed to learn the truth about what was going on. Because Peter and Mary were unaware that they were being watched, they simply sat back and waited. They noticed the car pull into the lot but were unconcerned until the door opened and a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, they recognized her. That had to be her. The woman was clutching a single red rose just as they'd seen in the video. She took her time approaching the grave and kept her head down. She froze when she finally looked up. They stood calmly and stared at each other for a few moments. Mary finally took a step forward. The supervisor was taken aback to find her happy and even crying from delight. She addressed the woman by name, calling her Noah. Peter took a step forward as well, reaching out his arms to the woman named Noah. She didn't move right away, almost as if she was considering what she should do next. But when she made up her mind, she approached Peter and reciprocated his hug. It was as though all the stress had evaporated. The supervisor felt bad for spying on such a touching moment, so she walked away from the tree and went to speak with the trio. Mary and Peter were perplexed as to why the supervisor was still around and why she cared enough to monitor their family's activities. Her next inquiry surprised them even more. The supervisor inquired as to who Noah was and why such secrecy was required. Mary and Peter thought her question was impolite, but Noah didn't seem to bother. After all, the supervisor had grown accustomed to seeing Noah, and the response was nothing short of astonishing. Noah confessed that she was the daughter of Mary and Peter. The boss couldn't believe it. She'd imagined Noah wasn't related and was instead an old friend or lover. Yet after learning the reality, the supervisor was even more perplexed as to why Mary and Peter needed to spy on the tomb. Noah revealed that she fled away as a teenager and began her own life. She wasn't sure her parents would want to see her when she eventually decided to reconnect with them. Instead, she went to Michael's grave on her own. Noah had a confession to make now that they were back together.